All right, welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 3, and this is Session 3. You know, what we've done is we've started off every session with a prologue when we got into justice. Today's not going to be any different, and we've been looking at a theodicy of sorts. Everybody understands what a theodicy is, right? It is a defense of God in relation to the presence of evil in the world. And the problem is this: if God is omnipotent, He's all-powerful, and He is fully good, then He would want to alleviate suffering. But there is so much suffering going on in the world. How in the world can we say that God is good and God is omnipotent when He allows so much suffering? And so we saw last week how that problem actually manifests itself. When I showed you that video last week, and I don't know how many of you went and watched that, maybe that fuller debate on that subject, but I wanted us to kind of get an idea of the magnitude of the problem. Well, I've looked at a lot of, and theodicy is no new thing. If you were to write a book on theodicy, it'd be a crowded field. There are probably thousands of books that have been written on theodicy. I think it'd be hard to get published because the number one question that any publisher asks when they get ready to publish a book is, who else has written on this? And when they would go look at that and say, you know what, there's 92,433 other books on this, what are you going to say that hasn't already been said? So it's a crowded field. But I have to tell you that when I look at the theodicies, and by the way, that doesn't mean there's 42,000 different theodicies. There's basically only three. You could say four. I'll talk about that today just for a moment. But here's the thing. I agree with parts of them, but with other parts of them, I am extremely unhappy, and I don't believe they're following the Bible. So basically, as I just said, there are about three different kinds of theodicies. There are detailed differences within each of those kinds, so there's kind of splinters of that, depending on how you're looking at it. And so what I want to do is to present to you a theodicy that is different from any that I have either heard of or read of. Now, I do have quite a number of books in my library on this subject that are theodicies. And these guys mention all the different, variants of the theodicies. But I'm not just trying to be different. What I'm trying to do is put together a true and accurate presentation of my defense of God. Not that I don't want to say God needs defending, but I think that we need to have an answer for the difficult questions. And so I want to put together a true and accurate theodicy that contains premises that are not only logical, they make sense to our mind, but they are true. And so we'll judge in our minds whether or not these things I'm going to give you are logical, and then we'll let the Word decide if they are true. Because every theodicy has to start with something, and here's what I've started mine on. I believe that the Bible is the infallible Word of God. Therefore, the theodicy has to rest on the truth of the Scriptures. And because I think only the Scriptures are able to tell us all the necessary things that we need to know about God. And so, by the way, I'm not the only one to say, hey, I believe the Bible is authoritative and I want my theodicy to rest on the Bible. That's not unique. That gets done by other people. What is different is I am going to take this a step further. I am going to allow the Bible rightly divided to dictate the true statements that we're going to put together in this theodicy. In other words, this is a theodicy that takes into account that there has been a dispensational change. Now, why would most theodicies leave that out? Well, first of all, because most people are not dispensational. There's a second reason. And the second reason is the only thing they're looking at in their theodicy is to go all the way back to the beginning where sin originated and all of that kind of business. That's as far as they go back in their defense. I mean, that's where they go. But when you come to the actual argument or objection against God, it's not about what happened way back there. It's about what is happening now. In other words, look, okay, so evil came into the world, and maybe God didn't create it, but here it is. What is He doing about it today? Well, see, when you ask that question, you get a very different answer. Because if you're looking back in the Old Testament, God did intervene in the physical circumstances of Israel over and over again. When the plagues came on Egypt, they were miraculously delivered from those. You remember that God parted the waters of the Red Sea and they walked across on dry ground. If you remember, God rained down manna to feed them in the wilderness where there wasn't any food crops. And what did He do? He gave them water from the rock. I mean, I'm just giving you, just in the Exodus, there's a plethora of things that God did to intervene on the behalf of His people. Flash forward into the Gospels. What is Jesus doing? He's feeding 5,000 with a few loaves and fishes. He's walking on water. He's calming the storm with His words. He's raising some from the dead. He is healing the blind. He's causing the lame to walk. He's casting out unclean. He's doing all of those things. Is He intervening? He absolutely is. And so you get into the dispensation of grace, and you know what? People, because they're not dispensational, they think all those things ought to continue to be happening. And you heard Dinesh D'Souza in the debate last time when he was asked, do you believe that God does answer prayer and intervene in connection with that? And you remember what his answer was. He said, I think God has, and I think He does, but it is very rare. Well, it's rarer than he thinks. But he's trying to be truthful about his understanding of it. And I appreciate that. It's a difficult position to be in. And he said the truth of how he understood it that you will never hear a pastor say. When he's talking to his people on the subject of prayer, he's just talking about God's going to do it. You claim it. God's kind of bound to do it. Make sure you get rid of all the caveats. Don't have unconfessed sin in your life. Have enough faith. Don't, all of that kind of business, and God's going to, and that's the way we do it. What's bothersome is that doesn't work, but yet most Christians, that's not a problem. If it was that way in anything else in your life, you'd get rid of it. If your car only worked rarely, you'd get rid of it. If your refrigerator only got cold rarely, you'd get rid of it. If you had an employee, they only showed up rarely, you'd get rid of them. But yet we have a relationship with God in this, and we think that's how God's doing it, and that doesn't bother us at all. No wonder the lost world looks at us like we're just superstitious fools. Because that's how we're acting. Okay, I know those are harsh words, but I'm just trying to grip us with the reality of it. Okay, so let me put some things on the board here, and then we'll move through to get this first part done. When I told you there are 3 different types of, and by the way, I hope that you got these. Tracy was sending these out for me, and I hope that you got the notes on this. But finitism, that is the idea that God is not omnipotent. He is finite. He's limited. He's not all-powerful. So the first answer to this is for a theodist to say, well, God's not responsible for evil because He's not omnipotent. He doesn't have the power to undo that. Okay, now look. I want to just leap you ahead just for a moment. I'm going to make a statement here, and I'm not going to explain it until several weeks from now. But I want to make the statement. There is coming a time when, at the blessed hope, or what people commonly refer to as the rapture, in which this body is going to get changed into an immortal body. We're going to be caught up to meet the Lord. We're going to go through the judgment seat of Christ, and then we're going to be placed in our positions in the heavenly places in a glorified body. I believe that at that time, we are still going to possess libertarian free will. Everybody with me here? Libertarian free will means it is free will of the sort that you could choose to do something other than you did. The determinists love to play this free will game. They call it free will, but they actually say you're being guided in such a way that what you freely chose, you didn't have an option for. You had to choose that. I do not believe that is biblical. I don't think that makes sense. And although, because it's not logical and I don't believe it's true, I have rejected that. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on determinism. But I also disagree with the idea of finitism, that God is not omnipotent. The next one is despotism. And when we're talking about despotism, look, we're talking about God. God is not fully good. I'm going to make a statement right here. Oh, I didn't finish the other thing. I'm sorry, I got off. We're going to be in glorified bodies. We're going to be in the heavenly places. You're still going to have free will, but there's not going to be any more sin. And you're saying to yourself, because I don't believe that when we get to heaven, suddenly God turns us into robots. I believe that you are still going to have libertarian free will, and I believe there is going to be no more sin for the believer. And you're going to say to yourself, how in the world will that be possible? That's what I'm going to answer in just a few weeks. Because it's a long answer, and I'm going to take the session to do it. But I need the whole session. But here it is. We don't have it going like that now, but there are at least 7 reasons why that is the way it will be going then. And that will answer this question. Well, if God can do it then, why can't He do it now? 7 reasons. It's not happening now, but it will happen then. Okay? And so you just have to wait for that. So this idea that God is not omnipotent, I disagree with that. That God is not fully good, I disagree with that. Because here's what I know. If God is not omnipotent and God is not fully good, He's not God. That is the very definition of what it is to be God. Now, there's one more you could add to that, and that is the crowd that goes, well, He's omnipotent and He's fully good, but He's not omniscient, so He doesn't always know what's coming, so He couldn't head it off at the pass, so to speak, because He didn't know. Disagree with that one too. God's omniscient. I not only think He knows the things that will happen, I think He knows all the things that could happen. That's how omniscient I think God is. And there is reason for that in the Scripture. I've already shown you one 2 weeks ago when we went over to 1 Kings. Remember when David went to deliver a city in Judah from the Philistines? And he's in that city, and Saul hears about it, and he's going to get his army, and he's going to go capture David. And David realized, so he asked the Lord, he says, Lord, has Saul heard about me being here? And he goes, yep. And he goes, well, okay, I got 2 questions for you. Number 1, is Saul going to come and try to take me? And the Lord said, yes, he is. And he goes, And the people of Keilah, this city that I delivered from the Philistines, are they going to give me up to Saul? And God says, yes, they are. And David says to his men, we got to get out of Dodge. So before Saul can get there, they go. So does it ever happen? No. But did God know what would happen? Yes. That's my point. Those illustrations are all through the Scripture. So God not only knows, by the way, did God know David was going to go ahead and leave before Saul got there? And you know what? I would have known that. And I'm not nearly God. You know why I would have known that? Because here's what I understand. David's not stupid. I mean, it's just common sense, isn't it? Now, I think God is way beyond common sense because he knew what would happen. All right. So let me move on. There is a third one that what it does is it denies or qualifies evil. There's parts of that sound pretty good, but parts of that don't. And I don't want to get into a breakdown of that because I'm going to reject all of that. What I'm going to do is I am going to give you rather and let me just put it up on the board. I'm going to give you a dispensational theodicy. And by that I mean I'm going to give it to you in a chart form, by the way. Richard? No. Yeah. Actually, yes. Thank you. That's number 4. Thank you. Actually, I was going to put number 4 was determinism, but I think determinism is so far off the truth, I didn't even want to put it on the board. You understand there's branches of that. One of those is the sovereignty argument. God is sovereign over everything, which means he controls everything. The fact that you're here today is because God decreed before the world began that when you were going to, on this day, you're going to be sitting right where you're sitting, writing what you're writing and hearing what you're hearing. He determined what I would say. He would determine what you would think about it, and he would determine everything about it, down to the smallest detail. That's determinism. When there was a debate going on between a sovereign, someone that sees sovereignty that way, and another guy, this guy said, "Hey, you know what? If God is the one that's making everything happen, you just made God the creator of sin and evil." You know what the determinist said? He said, "Yes, he's the creator of everything." You realize God cannot be fully good and evil at the same time. It can't be raining and not raining. It either is or it isn't. And because of the mutual distinction between evil and good, you can't be good by creating evil. That argument collapses under its own weight. Okay, so that's all I want to say about that. So now let me give you something on the PowerPoint real quick, and then we'll move to the lesson. I want to demonstrate to you that what I'm doing is not something that is just off in left field that shouldn't really be looked at. David Blumenthal wrote, "There are really 3 criteria for a good theodicy." I'm going to give you his. I'm going to quote them right here. And then I'm going to explain what they are on the board. His first one says, it should leave one with one's sense of reality intact. So the number one thing about a good theodicy is, I'm just going to put this in my own words. I mean, it's not that he didn't say it, he did, but what I'm saying is, it tells the truth about reality. If my theodicy says the sky is fuchsia, you're going to look up, every time you look up at the sky, you're going to go, gosh, that just doesn't work, does it? So it has to tell the truth about reality. Here's his second one. It should leave one empowered within the intellectual, moral system in which one lives. Now, let me put that into my words so that you understand that. Because what he's essentially saying here is, it cannot deny God's power and goodness. Because that's the moral framework in which we live. That God is good and God is omnipotent and God is those things. So it can't, it has to leave you with that. In other words, a theodicy can't all of a sudden create a God that really doesn't exist in any of our minds in order to solve the problem of evil. And here's the third one. Oh, he got away. It should be as intellectually coherent as possible. And that means it is logical and it makes sense. You ought to be able to follow the reasoning. Everybody get that? Okay. So I want you to know that my theodicy follows all three rules. In fact, I think it follows it better than some of those other theodicies where they're trying to get God off the hook by not being truthful about reality or denying something about God's character. Okay. So just to end this part, I just want to tell you, I am not going to do a prologue next week. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this off until the very end of this book. And the reason is because I'm going to give you a much fuller look that will include things that you'll be glad you heard. In other words, I am going to talk to you about this theodicy, this bi-dispensational theodicy, and I'm going to give it to you on a chart, a very detailed chart, so that for you folks that are visual like me, that will help you make sense of it. But the reason I want to do this is because I want to talk to you about the significance of the judgment seat of Christ. I want to talk to you about how we are going to have libertarian free will in the heavenly places, and yet we will not be sinners that are rebelling against God in any form or fashion. How is that possible? And I need to explain the whole thing, and so I'm going to do that in a single session. Even then, it's going to be hard to do, but I'm going to boil it down to a single session. And so I just want you to understand that that's where we're going, and that's what that's about. I'm excited about getting that done because I haven't seen anyone do a dispensational approach to theodicy. And again, people say, there is no dispensational approach to theodicy. When evil started is when evil started. Yeah, but the question in Israel's program about why is this evil happening is different from why that same question, why evil is happening now. Some of the evils that Israel encountered were because they walked contrary to God's law and they suffered judgment. That is not happening to you and me today. So the questions aren't always consistent across the board. So what I want to do is I want to answer it for both programs. Here's where it came from. Here's what was going on here. And today, here's what's going on. And here's why God's evidently not doing something about it. And then we'll talk about that in a dispensational theodicy. I think it's the only way to really satisfactorily answer all the questions. That's what I'm trying to do. Okay, with that, let's go to the book. So here we go. Romans chapter 12, verse 17. Recompense to no man evil for evil. We beat that horse, so we know what that's about, right? So now let's look at the last phrase in this verse. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. So now let's define the terms. Here we go on your note taker. Provide means to supply, or to furnish. So when someone's committed some kind of injustice against us, we don't render evil for evil. Instead, we're going to provide things honest. We have to define the terms to understand what that is. So when it says provide things honest in the sight of all men, the difficult part is provide things honest. In the sight of all men, that's pretty easy. In other words, that's something that everybody's going to see. So let's take a look at this. So in defining this, the next one is, and by the way, so let's look at things. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. So what are those things? Well, if we're not going, now think of the context here. Don't recompense evil for evil. That's a response. But provide things honest in the sight of all men. So you know what? Instead of evil, there are some other things that we can provide. So on your note taker, the things are referring to our conduct, to our actions. We're going to provide a certain kind of action in the sight of all men. And here's what that action won't be. It won't be evil for evil. Evil is detrimental in some way. And so what would be the opposite of that? If it's not evil, if we're not going to provide evil in response to what they've done to us, we're going to provide what? What did you say, Gloria? Good, okay. And okay, did you say something, Linda? Good. Okay. Give me a okay. Is that what you said, Barb? Okay. So everybody said good, but I want you to think about, I want you to refine that just a little bit. We'll just take a minute. Oh, that's really good. Beneficial. Beneficial. Because evil would actually be the very opposite of beneficial. If we rendered evil for evil, in other words, you know what we're doing? Yeah, we're taking away. What we want to do is we want to have a response that is actually beneficial to them in some proper way. Okay. Now, with that in mind, so there's 100 different ways. I'm going to refer you later to your notes, and you can look at those because I'm going to give you some examples of how this works in our everyday life. I think you could kind of figure that out on your own, but I'm bringing up some examples in your notes. And so when Paul says, don't recompense evil for evil, but provide things honest in the sight of all men. Look, let's just take a look at the verse. All right. Oh, by the way, benefit, that's exactly the word I was after. Barbara got it. A good deed, kindness, favor, a grace, or indulgence. So back to Romans 10. So providing things honest in the sight of all men. Here's what was strange about this. I need to take you back to something that you hoped you would forget when you got out of high school. Grammar. Just for a moment. Because this word, the way it's used, honest is normally an adjective. And you know what we would say it? Provide honest things. Now now I know languages do these different. We would say white house. We put the adjective before the noun. In French, they would say maison blanche. That the blanche is the white. It comes after the noun. But in English, when a word precedes the noun, usually it's an adjective. If it's an adverb, what changes? Yeah, it usually adds a suffix of ly. Let me give you a biblical example here. It says in 2 Corinthians 8:21, providing for honest things. See, that sounds really close, doesn't it? Provide things honest in the sight of all men. And now it says providing for honest things. Here the honest is an adjective. That's what we were talking about, right? But now take a look at Romans 13:13. Let us walk honestly. Now the honestly follows the noun, which means it's working as an adverb. Now you say, well, what difference does that make? Yeah, that's right. And there is the ly. So now that we got that little bit of grammar out, here's going to be the thing. we have a noun, and then we have a descriptor that comes after the noun. Usually, that should be an adverb. But there's no ly. Provide things honest. By the way, if it was honestly, it wouldn't be modifying the noun. It'd be modifying the verb, provide. Honestly provide. But the word is honest, which makes it an adjective, which makes it modify the noun. So, but it's put in the place of the adverb, but it's spelled like the adjective. So I got to looking at that and I thought, why? Because the Bible knows how to use this the way we understand it. I just gave you 2 illustrations. Why does it do this? Here's what I think. I think what it's doing here is making us look at both of them. Because of where they put it, look at it like it's an adverb. Because of what the word actually is, no ly, it's not an adverb, it actually is an adjective, but it's put in a place that would make you think, wait, this belongs to the adverb. So what I want to do is I want to define that in 2 different ways. Here's the first one. If it's honest, back to your note taker. If it's honest, it's beneficial, helpful, or kind. That is describing, that's the adjective on what kind of thing. And that word is an adjective. Provide things honest. So he didn't say honest things, because if he'd have said that, you would have stopped right there, and you'd have never thought about that in connection with the verb provide. Everybody with me here? Provide things honest. So if it's an adjective, it's going to go to the things. If it's an adverb, it's going to go to provide. So I think he put it back there so you'll look at both of those. And the only way to do that is spell it like an adjective and put it in the sentence in the place the adverb would be. Because you would never say, provide honestly things. See, you would say, provide things honestly, which is going back to provide. But it's no ly, it's just honest. Okay, so with that in mind, when you're adjective, you're saying instead of rendering evil for evil, do something beneficial, helpful, and kind. Now let's do, it's in the place of an adverb. Let's go back and talk about what it means to provide things honest, with the emphasis on honest. And back to your note taker, it means to do them, you're providing them in a way that is genuine, sincere, and heartfelt. Does everybody see what I'm saying? What I'm talking about here? So you got 2. I'm looking at it from honest being used in 2 different ways, and I think the reason that it's put there is because in the English language it would make you now look at both of that. So when you put that all together, it would say this: don't recompense evil for evil, but furnish conduct and actions that are beneficial, kind, and helpful. And when you do that genuinely and sincerely from your heart. Why? Because it is no good to do the right thing for the wrong reason. That undoes it. It's like 2 brothers that have been fighting, and the parents go, tell each other you're sorry. And they do it like this. Sorry. Yeah, where did I get that? So, from my parents. So you understand, the adverb part is just as important. And I think that's the key, isn't it? It's not just about do the right thing, but do the right thing for the right reason. Because, folks, when we do that, that's godliness. That right reason is godliness. That's what we're after there. Okay, so, by the way, we had a verse that was similar to this already. Remember back in Romans 12:9, he talked about let love be without dissimulation. Let it be the genuine article. Let it come from the heart. So let me give you a couple of references on that real fast. Ephesians 6:6. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God, where from the heart, with good will, there's what you're doing service as to the Lord and not to men. See, so you got both of them wrapped up there. Do the right thing, do it for the right reason. That's what I think is going on in this particular verse, and that's the reason that it's used the way that it is. One more, just to show you, this is true not just in the dispensation of grace, but also back in Israel's program. Look with me in 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said unto Samuel, look not on his countenance or on the height of his stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh on the outward appearance. You know what that would be? That would be what you're doing. He says, but the Lord looketh on the heart. He wants to know what's going on in there, that this is a genuine thing. By the way, you understand, there's a real perversion of this. I remember reading an account. It was in a book called Peace Child. Now, some of you may have read that. It's been out for a lot of years. I read it back way when I was young and had hair. And there was a missionary. He was talking about these two tribes that he was trying to do missionary work. They were always warring with each other, but not in open warfare. It was very covert type. They would, a kid would wander off and they'd capture the kid and kill him. They were cannibals. And he was trying to, broker something between them. I don't remember. It's been so long ago. And I meant to research it and refresh my memory, and I just didn't. There was just too much else other to do. But here's what happened. Each of these tribes would, that's not what I'm really after, not after the solution. What I'm after is, sometimes they would act like they were going to make peace, and they would invite them in, and they would lay out this big spread, and they would honor them and do all of that. And when it looked like these people were convinced that, wow, this is great, they would slaughter them, cook them up and eat them. And because they had fooled them, that was the height of the skill they were trying to develop. So when the missionary told them the story of Christ, and of course he's talking about, the days leading up to the crucifixion, when he got to the part where Judas betrayed the Lord in the garden, they cheered. They thought, yeah, we understand that guy. That's the way to do it. Not until they began to come to Christ did they understand it's a heart issue first, and the conduct has to come from the heart. But you understand how men can pervert that, and they did. Okay, just to give you that. Let's go back to our note taker here. Oh, I got a couple of others, so let me give them to you quick. Ephesians 6:6. Not with eye service, that's what we're talking about, just look at me, okay? But as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. And then in Colossians 3:22, servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, there it is again, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. All right, so let's take this back to Romans chapter 12 and verse 17. So that's what it means to provide things honest in the sight of all men. Instead of rendering evil for evil, instead we're going to return something that is kind and beneficial to them, and we're going to do it in the sight of all men, which means they're not the only ones we're trying to make an impact on. Trying to make an impact on everybody else that sees this happening. And it's actually bigger than that, but we're going to talk about that later when I get into my theodicy. So let's take a look at this last verse, 18. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. And by the way, the reason verse 18 can happen is because of the response of verse 17. You understand, in verse 17, if you recompense evil for evil, there's going to be less people you're going to be able to live peaceably with, because you're going to be at war with them. So let me give you, back to your note taker, figure number 2, the results of providing things honest. Number 1, it puts godliness on display. And that's important. More important than you think. Folks, more important than you think. I'm going to talk about this when we get into the theodicy part at the end of this book. But listen, every time you do this, something of great magnitude is being accomplished. You just can't see it with your physical eyes. You don't see it manifested. Every time you endure suffering, you are doing something that you probably don't even realize you're doing, and it's a good thing. It's a great thing. It's a wondrous thing. And once you know about it, it will help you as you go through suffering. Here's number 2. It promotes peace with all men. That's what verse 18 is about. Living peaceably with as many people as possible. Promotes peace with all men. Romans 12:18 says, if it be possible, because sometimes it just isn't going to be possible, but don't let it be because of us, let it be because of them. Now this implies several things, and I'm going to give them to you, and this is your note taker, figure 3. Here we go. We give our best effort to preserve peace and appease the anger and malice of others. We give our best effort to that. Not, you know what, we gave a half-hearted effort, kind of hoping they'll do what they do, so maybe we can do something back to them. Wrong kind of thinking. Number 2. Oh, did I go too fast? We give our best effort to preserve peace and to appease the anger and malice of others. Number 2, we are not the one to provoke a quarrel. In other words, the way to live peaceably with all men is not to be the instigator. And number 3, if a quarrel commences, we don't do anything to prolong it. That's why the don't recompense evil for evil comes in. So there are the 3 implications of Romans chapter 12 and verse 18. Now let me take you to figure 4 in your note taker, because look, people may do all kinds of things against you, and they may be wrong, and they may be an injustice. May I just say to you, there is no injustice that will take place in this world that will not be dealt with at some point. God will not let it go. So if it's up to Him, let it be up to Him. This is the exhortation for us. So now I want us to take a moment and think about the things that cause conflict. And I just give you a list of them, and here we go. So we got to kind of run through these. What have I got left? 2 minutes. Good luck. Number 1. Offensive language. In other words, what we say to people and how we say it is important. I mean, I can look at Ruby and I go, "Oh, Ruby, you look nice today." Or I can look at Ruby and go, "Oh, well, you look nice today." See, I said the same thing, but how I said it gave you a whole different meaning. There are people that love to be catty. And they're petty, and they always are looking for a way to put you down in front of other people. That all that does is provoke. Number 2, provoking carriage. There is such a thing as nonverbal communication. This is visible, not audible. It's a reflection of our attitude towards someone. Here, I've tried to learn this, and I've tried to practice it. But when have you ever been talking to someone, and the whole time they're talking to you, they're kind of just looking off like whatever you've got to say is not that big a deal to them, and they really, you know what, that's all nonverbal communication. Here's the 3rd one. Prideful conduct. I don't think I need to say too much about that. Humility ought to be a hallmark of every area of our life. Prideful conduct. Number 4. Selfishness. We've already covered this in Romans chapter 12. Paul's covered the basis on selfishness because that breeds jealousy and envy in relationships. It just causes conflict. Number 5, untrained jocularity. I tell you who falls into this category the most, and that's kids. Kids hear adults joking with each other, and because they want to have this close friendship communication, they want to try to emulate that, but they don't realize they have inappropriately stepped over the line. You know, they're untrained. They just don't know. For instance, you know what? With Mark, you know what? He could say, hey, I was trying to do something, and I go, yeah, I don't know why you'd try to do that. You know you can't do that. You know, and I'm just going on with him, right? We do that kind of stuff all the time. But if one of my kids was standing there and they're little and they hear me doing that, they might go, yeah, you're just stupid. Okay, see, untrained jocularity. They're trying to be funny. They just don't realize what they said was actually truly offensive. So, just to give you that. The next one is, by the way, don't have to be a kid to do that, because I've had the opportunity to be on the receiving end of the other too. All right, so the habit of contradiction and argument. I'll tell you what these are. I call these logical bullies. No matter what you say, they're going to disagree. If you said the sky is blue, they're going to go, well, sometimes it's covered with clouds and then it's white. Okay. So let me give you the next one. Fault finding. Some people just have this natural ability for discovering the faults of others. And the problem is they tell them everywhere they go. You know, Barbara's a nice person, but. Oh, when you hear that word but, you know you're fixing to turn a corner and go in a whole different direction from Barbara's a nice person. Now you're going to go off and say something else. Look, I'm trying to think how I should say this properly in case they ever see these videos. I had two ladies that came to the house yesterday. It was a lady that was running for office in the May election, and her campaign manager, and they were in Imperial. And they drove up in my driveway, and I invited them up on the front porch, and we sat there for about 15 minutes. And I asked her questions about the office that she was running for and what her background was. And in the midst of that, I said, do you know your opponent? And she goes, and she said, and she gave me the name. Another lady. And I said, tell me one good thing about your opponent. And they thought, and I'm not throwing her under the bus here, like really hard for me to say anything good about this person. She said, she said something about when she was in school, she was a track star. And I said, do you know her? She said, I don't. I really don't know her. So the reason she didn't know anything good is because she did not personally know her, didn't socialize with her, and really haven't had any contact. She just knows that that's her opponent. But you know what? I didn't want to hear, tell me something bad about your opponent, because that's what every politician does. Ooh, you get a laundry list when you get to that. You know, it's funny. I don't really know them, so I can't tell you anything good, but I guarantee you for most people, if you said, tell me something terrible, they can start reeling that off even though they still don't know them. Funny, right? Now, she didn't do that, so let me be clear. She didn't do that. Okay, here's the next. So, fault finding, that's one. By the way, those things always get an evil report. That always gets back. I used to have these little truisms. I used to write them down in the blank pages between the Testaments and my Bible, stuff that I just think, you know what, I need to just kind of remember this principle, this concept, and I'd write it down. And here's one I wrote down years and years ago. I still got it in my Bible. It says this: if you don't say it, it will never come back to haunt you. Haven't always abided by that. Always wish I had it. Just saying. School of Hard Knocks finally kind of clues you in. Okay, here's the next one. Indiscreet frankness. Some people have the idea that just because what they're saying is true, they have the right to say it anywhere and everywhere they want. And blurting out the truth to people to their face is sometimes, at best, impolite. and destructive at worst. Now, I can remember when I was up in Glen Rose, I can remember a man, and he is my friend, he is, but he had this indiscreet frankness. He would tell you everything that he thought it may have been true in his mind, but he was going to say it to your face and to everybody else. That doesn't do anybody any good. And finally, I just had to say, I called his name and I said, hey, just because you think something is true doesn't... Look, I said, let me put it in this framework. You remember I told you I have a book that I started writing years ago, and it's for me and me alone to read when I get older. You know what? One of those things, because older people do this. They just do it automatically. Maybe not everybody, but enough that I thought, I don't want to do that. So you know what I wrote down here? Michael, just because it pops into your head doesn't mean it needs to come out of your mouth. Think about what you're saying. But you know what? Some people have that disease before they ever get old. And so that's why it's on the list. Okay. Now, I want to give you, did I give you those last indiscreet frankness? Okay, so I think that's the end. So let me take you to figure 5 and let's finish this up. Oh, okay, it went off. I didn't remember that. There are some times in which we're just not going to be able to live peaceably. It's not because we're trying to not live peaceably, but it's because of other reasons. And I'm going to give you 4 of them right here so that you understand this does not mean that you become a doormat or that you give up all of your principles of life to make peace with somebody. There are limits to this, and they are biblical. So let me give them to you. Number 1 on figure 5 is when you refuse to do evil. There are those people that when you refuse to do evil, it will make them angry with you. They'll just need to be angry. It's as much as, it's possible live peaceably with all men. But if someone says to me, hey, if you're going to keep going to church, we just can't have that. Yeah, hey, that's up to you. In other words, I'm not going to stop doing some things so that you can feel okay with me. So a refusal, and by the way, that was actually not the right illustration for that. That would be someone trying to get you to commit evil, and you don't. Yeah, you know what? We're working together on the job. Let's steal stuff from the company. And if you say no, all of a sudden now, you're on the outside. Now we're going to punish you. Okay, but that's your choice. So refusal. Here's the second one. When Christian virtue is despised. In other words, you know what? Telling the truth. So when someone says, how did this happen? You know what? If you're going to tell the truth about it, there's always going to be somebody that's not happy with the fact that you told the truth. What's always amazing to me is they're always happy with lying and happy with unscrupulous behavior, but they're angry when the truth is told. Is it any wonder the world is in the condition it is today? Is it any wonder? Are you kidding me? All right. Number 3. When we teach unwelcome truths. Sometimes that may be offensive to people, and it violates the peace. Jesus had love and compassion for people, but many were offended in him. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have some kind of discretion when we're talking to people. Of course, you have to use your brain, but it means also being able to know when to correct something and when not to. Now, when I was a young guy, I just thought, man, if I hear somebody say something that wasn't right, I got to, nicely, but I got to say something to correct that. I've wised up since then. I still feel the same way about it when I hear it. But look, when folks come out and visit and they say something and I know it's not right, I don't jump in there and correct that. Now, used to, I just couldn't resist. Now, I just let that go. You know why? Because they'll eventually get there and they'll get it. So let's let the Lord do that work in their heart. I don't want to be their tutor and governor. But if they say to me, what do you think about this? Now I have a chance to actually show them, and I can do that, with their best interest at heart and do it kindly. So it means knowing when to correct something and when not to. And here's the last one. When we oppose the course of this world and Satan's policy of evil. Because I tell you, that is going to get a rise out of the adversary. All right, now that's all of the things on your note taker. There's still a couple of pages of notes that are left. And what they're doing is they're just summarizing these verses. Recompense to no man evil for evil. That's pretty honest. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. Let that godly conduct and behavior be seen by everybody. And that godly conduct is something that's actually going to be helpful to the people who have committed injustice against us. And by knowing how we're supposed to handle ourselves, if it be possible, then we can live peaceably with all men. Here's the last thing I do want to say, though. It's in those notes, and I want you to read them this week. But why is it so important to why is God saying it that way? Now I'm going to just say this here, and this drum is going to get beat all the way through the rest of chapter 12 and the first 7 verses of chapter 13. The reason God wants that is because that kind of peace and quiet among people provides the best opportunity for the work of the Lord to be done in people. Because I got to tell you, when a guy is your enemy and you're actively fighting each other, he's not hearing your presentation of the gospel. And he doesn't want to be told about how to be edified unto godliness. And God knows that this kind of atmosphere, when it prevails in a society, that's when the work of God, the gospel and the edification of saints, it flourishes in that environment. And because of that, God has instituted human government, who is going to enforce the peace. And there's a reason God committed that to government. In fact, the Bible's going to say He ordained government to do that, because that is the atmosphere in which this best happens. So it's not about us. It's about the work that our Father is doing through us. That's the important thing. So you keep our eye on the ball here. So here's the introduction to it. May have mentioned it a little earlier, but I'm just saying, here it is in earnest. And so this finishes up 17 and 18, and we'll continue on in our book next time. So this is the end of the lesson here.